And people will join us as they're ready, right? So let's see, record. All right. So welcome, Kevin, and welcome to everyone else who's here. I'm really excited about today's meeting. As you know, Kevin Swift from California is going to be talking to us about process-based restoration, something I don't have experience with, so I'm expecting to learn a bunch today. And Kevin spent time, came out to Massachusetts. How many years ago? Probably
13 or 14. It's been a while.
No way. It's that long? Wow.
Well, 2013, 2014. So probably seven years ago. Yeah, it's been a.
Yeah. I would have guessed 5 or 6. So it's even longer than I thought. So spent time out here. We did some flow devices together. He went back to California. Very different environment out there, obviously, which I'm sure you'll touch upon some of the challenges that you've had to deal with. And now it's more of an issue, or the process-based restoration is definitely taking off, and you've been doing a lot of that. And so without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to you. We're going to keep questions till the end. We'll do a Q&A then. Kevin's going to talk for about half an hour or so, and then we'll have an informal discussion about everything else. So any other, and I did, just so everyone knows, I did turn on the recording. I finally remembered. So, all right, Kevin, it's all yours.
Okay, cool. I'll do even more of a thumbnail intro. I've been doing process-based restoration as a job full-time for not quite 3 years out here in California, and was trying to do pond levelers as a business before that, which here in California hasn't taken off like it did at Massachusetts. The greater issue in California is lack of water. So we kind of have the opposite problem to Massachusetts, where you've got too much water, too many beavers. We've got not enough water, not enough beavers. So in terms of getting a quick overview of some of the California pond leveler projects, the California Beaver Summit Day 1, where Mike was presenting, I'm on there talking about that stuff. So this will be a little more focused on process-based restoration, and it's going to be a little weird. I'm trying to cover both high and low level topics and some of the basics and some project specifics. So it's a little bit scattered. I'm in the middle of building a slideshow for about 5 different use cases. So you'll get to see chunks of a bunch of them. So I'm hoping it's not totally incoherent. So I'll go ahead and fire this up. There you go. Can everybody see that? Okay, cool.
Yep, I can.
Excellent. The cover photo here is a proposed build in Goose Lake, Oregon that I'm hoping to get to work on. And the first bunch of example slides will be taken from that job. And thinking about like the really high level overview, it's important to note that when we're talking about business that wants to be sustainable, the triple bottom line is totally bullshit. I mean, if you're thinking of sustainability, of course, you've seen this cute little 3-way Venn diagram. Oops, I'm sliding it there, sorry. And that it doesn't actually begin to tell the truth of how things are actually interrelated. And it's not just bullshit, but a specifically misleading type of bullshit that suggests business as usual is sustainable, growth can continue on a finite planet, and we don't have to do anything differently than we are. But David Brower nailed it when he said there is no business to be done on a dead planet. And, you know, this is the reality of the thing right here. Humans and profit are a tiny subset of Earth, and both are only possible within a functioning global ecosystem that allows for survival of people to perform their businesses and a sufficiency of resource and energy supplies that make those businesses possible. So forget the triple bottom line. It's not the reality. So process-based restoration depends on space, time, energy, and materials. And this will be the only ugly text-heavy slide in the whole presentation, I promise. When we're adding material to a riverscape to help it recover, the stream takes time to apply energy to those materials. And you're not going to fix 200 years of degradation in cattle and mining and logging and extirpation of beavers and indigenous genocide. Like, you're not going to fix that overnight. But given sufficient energy and materials, you can get recovery happening quite rapidly. So the energy we're talking about is stream power, vegetation, photosynthesis, ideally beavers. And it's the interactions between that stream power and the structurally forced complexity that we produce with the structures we build that does the real work. And materials, of course, are just anything that ends up in the stream, including out here stuff like Detroit riprap, right? Like dead cars that then wash out and fall into the stream, and tires and boulders and vegetation and anything that you could use. We focus only on biodegradable materials because we don't want to add a bunch of trash to the streams. So as an example of the space principle, this is the floodplain at the project, and the outlines show you the extent of wetted area in those years. And you need enough space in your potential project area to make building it worth the expenditure of fossil fuel energy. Money is less of a problem in that someone is just going to keep pushing print until there's more of it. So focus on your carbon burn more than economic cost. And if we're burning tons of carbon to make square meters of habitat, that's a global net negative. So people who are losing their island homelands to sea level rise would not appreciate our local efforts to restore these meadows that I'm sitting in if it's costing us globally. So the red stuff you're looking at is false color National Agriculture Imagery Program data. I just traced the outlines from Google Earth, and it looks like this meadow has lost 93% of its floodplain connectivity at base flow. Now, it's probably not quite that bad because Google Earth is pretty crude and you can't extrapolate super well, but we've clearly lost quite a lot of floodplain connectivity. So we want to restore this meadow, but we also need to be specific when we're talking about restoration, which is to say, we need to determine what it is, what baseline condition we want to restore it to. So are we talking about pre-contact, 1491? Are we just talking about before the fur rush when we lost all of our beavers? Is it before everything was logged? What about when we started suppressing our forest fires and our stocking rates went way up and our trees started drinking all our water instead of getting it into the creek? So be specific about what you want to restore it to. So our restoration goal specific to this project would be restore hydrologic function to everything in blue by year 5, which is pretty ambitious, but we've got beavers on site. So they're going to help us all along the way, kind of repairing and maintaining our structures that they like, critiquing those of ours that they don't, building their own, and making sure that the project is a success. Another aspect of space is stream length. So you've got meadow width and stream length, and you want to track both of those and make sure that you have enough. You can see we've got 5 3/4 active miles and 2 1/4 miles of dry. So if all we did is wake up the dry channels, we've added quite a lot of channel length, which is worth doing even if you ignore the embedded complexity and diversity of habitat that kind of a build will produce. And then once we've got those orange channels active, we can build those too and keep pushing that water sideways and increasing our floodplain width and connectivity. When we're talking about time, it's really, really important to remember that we're not talking about clock time. Clock time only applies to things like scheduling and permitting and getting your budget done. But it tells us nothing at all about flow years. So when we're talking flow years, we're talking periods when geomorphic work is being done by the stream. And that's what really matters. And you can think about the difference between a 10-year flood and 10 one-year floods, right? That 10-year flood is going to have vastly more power and get a lot more work done. And those little one-year floods might not change anything really significant. So during those bigger events, you could see nasty incision in a matter of days. Conversely, if you have enough material in the stream and you've got good complexity and you get sediment coming in those big events, you might get your whole build completed, geomorphically speaking, in a couple of days. So down at the bottom, you can see a USGS stream gauge. It's just an example. It's not actually downstream of this project, but this one shows the widely varying degrees of stream power that you have in these systems. And if you look at it between 2011 and 2013, it varies by several orders of magnitude. So any materials in this system during those high flow periods, they're getting a ton of energy. So they're being recruited from the banks. They're being deposited, hopefully behind structures. They might just get blown right out of the system. And then in 2013, you can see there's almost no work being done. So properly directed, the stream brings us all this free energy, and we can use it to do work that we want to try to design a system that's a riverscape that's healthier. And this energy works both ways over time. What you're looking at here is the lower left corner of that Goose Lake build in 1994. And you can see there's this kind of network of small channels in the center, a little incision down lower. And then 1997 was a huge year that you can see all over the landscape of the West. Google didn't have imagery for that, but by 2006, this same stream power has cut a new channel, and it's degrading, it's incising, it's drying out. You can see how along the channel it's brown instead of green. It's hard to tell from 94. You can see it's wetted. In 06, it's all reamed out. So all that power that cut that channel down, if we'd had enough structural complexity in there, we'd be reducing stream power by the stream energy getting used up working on those structures. Then as the stream slows down, it drops out sediment, which brings up the stream bed elevation and starts connecting it back to the floodplain. These structures that I'm talking about are hand-placed wood, and we're not using materials from outside of the watershed. The only thing we'll bring in are untreated wood posts, and that's mostly because they're a lot easier to use and they're cheaper per unit than cutting your own posts on site and then making them with a chainsaw. So by focusing only on on-site materials, we don't have any trucking costs. We're not shipping rock from a quarry 40 miles away over a mountain pass to dump it in the stream. We're just using what's around us. That also keeps us from introducing invasive species. So if you're in a watershed that has invasives, they're already there. You definitely don't want to be adding new ones to that system. On this build, we're going to have to truck in materials from within the watershed. It's about 8 miles to a juniper cut, which I'd rather not do, but there's nothing on site usable except grass. There are some willows, but those are in heavy demand for beaver food. So by year 5, I hope to have enough willows recruited from having improved hydrologic function that we can then start using those on-site materials in our structures. So it's a process, it's not one and done. And you can think about growing your materials on-site over time. You might even consider a build where you do nothing but plant a zillion willows and then wait 5 years for them to size up and then come in and use those. So start thinking about different temporal dimensions to your build, as well as spatial dimensions, as well as the material that's on site. If we move to a conceptual map, this would be kind of the first step in a design. It's very rough. It's just an idea of what we might do. And these polygons bleed into each other intentionally. I did that on purpose. Each will have a different blend of techniques that's suited to their conditions and our restoration goals, but there's not really any meaningful separation on the ground because this is all hydrologically connected. So up at the top in the purple, we've got a couple of source problems that are disconnecting a bunch of the meadow. It's channelized down into a now blown out culvert. So we're going to correct those source problems, spread the flow out at the top to bring it down through the meadow. Over in the green, that's where the beavers are. So we're going to be building anchor structures for them to adopt, and ideally driving hydrologic connectivity over into that orange, which is where the willows are. So the beavers right now are in an incised channel, well separated from the willows, and they can't get up, harvest willows, and get back to the stream without being under really serious predator pressure. So we're going to fix that. And then all the small channels in the orange, we're just going to be spreading that material out. Or not orange, red, sorry. So the red is where the willows are. About the midline of the property, we start seeing really severe incision in the blue, the orange, and the gray. That stuff's just totally beat up. Like, you could throw my van in most of those channels. Down there, we know we're not going to do much in the way of biology because we can't get that water up onto the floodplain because it's 15 feet down in a gully. So instead, what we're going to be focusing on down there in the incision is just throwing a bunch of wood in there. Just load it up, get it to start widening the channel, forcing a meander here and there, spreading things out, just breaking up the stream power so it stops cutting. Then we have a chance to get some vegetation in there. Then we can hope the beavers will colonize it, and it over, who knows, it might take 100 years to get back to floodplain connectivity. But at the very least, we can greatly complexify the in-channel habitat. So halfway down the build, we just abandoned all subtlety and just start hucking the wood in there. Abbreviation-wise, PALS stands for Post-Assisted Log Structure, and BDA is Beaver Dam Analog. So a PALS is mostly geomorphic, and a beaver dam analog is mostly biologic. So with the BDA, you're capturing sediment and water and raising that grade and spreading the water to recruit vegetation. With the PALS, you're forcing the stream to change towards more complexity. And when I say BDAs, I don't mean wicker. I don't build wickers for furniture. It's too slow and fiddly. I don't use it anymore. Structure level example for the same build. The blue arrows indicate backing up water and slowing it down, and the orange indicates we're trying to drive channel migration and evolution. I just put one arrow in each of these for simplicity's sake. The reality is they're affecting hydraulics in 3 dimensions and the build over time, all of it simultaneously. These dots, the stars, you could think of them as a fuzzy 15-meter pixel, because as the stream brings us energy, the system changes. And what is an appropriate build site this year might not be next year. And if you look at it, you'll note that these arrows are and stars are at confluences, diffluences, potential side channels, current depositional areas. We're looking for kind of acupressure points on the landscape where we can apply the minimum amount of structure needed to drive change. So like the permaculture principle, least change for greatest effect. So in any given build, the total number and exact placement of your structures will vary, but the general tendency to look for geologic and geomorphically significant points on the landscape that you can then influence, that general tendency is not going to change. So when we're talking watershed scale effects, you know, how big can you go? Right now, the biggest one that I've built is Shen Ranch, which is in the high desert volcanic headwaters of Smoke Creek on the border of Nevada. It's crazy dry, except this little stretch here has got a couple of springs in it. And so you're looking now at this slide on about a little more than half of the build, the North Reach. So we more than doubled stream length. In the whole build, we went from 5.5 miles to 11 miles, and tripled the wetted area in the meadow. And this this is already outdated. I have newer imagery that I just haven't uploaded yet. So in less than 6 months, this has become completely outdated. Down where that green blob is on the bottom, that's actually partially a lake now. There's that much more water in there. So you can build really big spatial areas. This is about a 500-acre build. So dream bigger, you know, think of the largest restoration project you can in your area, and then imagine building that. How do we do it? Well, we build our structures in complexes so that they're all interacting with and supporting each other. And here's an example from Tasman Koyom, which is where I'm sitting right now. The white name for it is Humbug Valley, and it's about 4,500 feet up in the Sierra Nevadas. Lots of encroaching conifers, lots of willows, this incised single thread channel. And the orange was the single channel that we encountered when we started building the structure complex. The wetlands that are along this orange channel are surviving, but they're drying out. You can see in the top that it's brownish, and they're getting smaller. They're not staying wet as long. So down at the bottom, we added the first 11 structure complex, which split the flow into 2 more streams, which added a whole bunch of channel length. And the most active structures are the upstream 3 that split those 2 new channels. In order to support those, we built 8 more to back the water up into the base of those structures so that they're not trying to hold up that whole new stream channel by themselves. So those 8 are hydraulically supporting the original 3, and that keeps the water really deep and slow. This is part of that complex. The top photo is also the top structure in the build, and the stream used to just go straight down the middle of the photo. So we added that left channel, which had been running maybe 10 years ago, and then an incision event down cut. So we just built that back up. The next structure down is on the bottom left. That structure that you see there activated the stream channel that's river right. And then the last photo is the new channel that we created with one of the structures that's backing up these 2 in the photo. So as the build continues, we've got complex number 2, which is splitting the flow river left again. I didn't include that channel length in here, but we're adding a bunch of complexity. We're stacking water high in the landscape to keep the late season flows going, and we want it spreading out into the meadow. And then complex 3, it's just a series of ponds, again, to bring up that water table and hopefully build some frog habitat. At the bottom, the build is complete for year 1. Complex 4 and 5, they're arresting a couple of head cuts that might otherwise migrate upstream and cut up the meadow. They're retaining water on that floodplain longer to keep it wetter, and they're reducing incoming stream power at the Yellow Creek confluence. And then in turn, those Yellow Creek structures on the blue line, which is the main stem, those Yellow Creek structures are raising the water height, backing water up into our floodplain structures, and reducing the drop from that floodplain into the main stem. So all those structures working together is what makes this build happen. If we just put in 2 structures at the top, it's really hard to know what would have happened. So always build mutually reinforcing structural complexes, never build a standalone. If you build one structure and find yourself worrying about it, just build another 50 and you can stop worrying about that one. So strength in numbers. And there's that complex. The top left is the floodplain as built. The top right is the structure in the main stem that one drops into. And then you can see how it looks 4 months later. When we got a little bit of flow, it filled up really nicely. Individual structures evolve over time. They're not meant to be one and done. They're not meant to be hardened and last forever. So this single structure that I'm showing you is here in the valley where I'm sitting in my van right now. And that stream channel in the center was just sort of flat, monotypical stream bed, nothing really interesting going on. It's not going to kill the fish, but it's also not that interesting. So we put in the structure, which is the picture. And then, a few weeks later, the right-hand side, stream right side of that structure scoured under next to the willows. We couldn't really pack them well, so we decided to just move on. And when it punched through, you can see that great big giant slug of sediment that popped out of the bottom of it. That's everything from fairly heavy gravel, find out down to sand and then silt. And it made this really beautiful, nicely sorted spawning gravel. So you've got a really nice red there that, depending on your fish, they each have a preferred size of gravel. Somebody's going to find just the right size in there. I didn't do the volumetrics, but it's about 1,000 square feet came out of there. So there's yards and yards of freshly reworked sediment in that. Here's another one. This is in Red Clover Valley. It was built by a different company, and we were asked to repair it. It scoured through on the right side, just like our structure did in the slide before. You really want to think about your language when you're talking about this stuff. It's not a failure. This is an evolution. My preference would have been to leave it just as you see it now, but we were asked to repair it. So with it built tight against that tall, unstable bank, it evolved into an open-ended structure. And if you look, you can see the view from downstream is the next photo. So it's scoured under, piped. You can also see that it's recruiting all of this bank material. It's highly mobile, and will frequently design and build structures intended to do this very thing. This one itself wasn't, and so we repacked it, added a bunch of sagebrush and a couple of posts. Pulled up the corner. It looks good. It's holding water, but it did exactly what I thought it would. It routed around a second time. Less than 2 weeks later, same spot, did the same thing, more of the bank fell in. Now, if this was a form-based construction build where you imagine you can just tell the stream what to do and it'll do it, this would be a really expensive failure. This would be something like $100,000 down the tubes. But process-based restoration is a lot trickier, right? So we're always trying to look a couple of moves down the chessboard. And here's the next one. The next two photos, the river is showing us where to build. It's showing us downstream where that sediment settled out is a low energy site where a channel spanner might actually have a chance to stick. And if you can get it to stick, all that new incoming sediment recruited by that structure above naturally settles out behind the new structure. And then you can get that floodplain connectivity that they were pursuing with this upper structure. So you put in a bunch of structures, see what the stream brings, and then evolve as a co-equal partner with the stream, and keep advancing your build without necessarily obsessing about and repairing the same structure again and again. You know, if you start fighting the site, you're absolutely going to lose. You can build these things out of anything you want. These are just some photos from a bunch of our different jobs all over the place, you know, up in the mountains, down in the desert. So the top are, it's actually 3 different builds. The bottom 2, that's just conifer trunks, the branches and slash, and a bunch of gravel that we shoveled, and those are right here in the valley. Up in Nevada in the desert, there was a big juniper cut, so all we had was dead juniper. We built our structures and then sprigged them with willows, and you can see in the photo on the right that they worked really well. The bottom is a sort of confined, minimal floodplain, foothills, high energy system. We couldn't get any posts to stick because the bottom was really, really heavy cobble. So we just started building hand-placed rock dams. And then we got some really high flow, and they actually survived quite well. I think they just hunkered down under the current. They could be tiny. These 2 little structures you could step over. You know, medium, 10, 20 feet wide, chest deep. And then the bottom one, that's about as big a structure as you'd ever build. And this is kind of the edge of the bell curve. It's an extreme example. I won't go into why we built it that way, but you can. You know, that's 2 about 28 inch DBH trees on top of about 15 other small conifers that I climbed up, skinned out, tied onto my truck, and pulled over on top of the brush pile. So you can go completely berserk. You probably shouldn't, because the beavers have got 5 million years of practice, and you rarely see them build something like we did in that previous photo. So if we're going to learn from the beavers, we need to consider that unlike an excavator build or a bulldozer build that fossilizes the channel in this single giant tantrum and then calls it done, process-based relationship or process-based restoration is a relationship. So we're initiating a relationship with a landscape over time, and like all relationships, it's going to take work. It's going to evolve, and it yields greater rewards over time. You know, the first year you're with somebody, you might have a lot of fun, but you're not necessarily going to get in that deep. You know, 10, 15, 20 years in, you probably learned a lot about yourself and the other person and can really work together well. So we don't have 5 million years practice like the beavers, clearly, but we can emulate them by letting the water do a lot of the work, stay engaged with the landscape over time, and done right in these builds, each successive iteration, every time you come back to a site, it should be easier because you've already built a big foundation, should be faster, less intensive. You shouldn't have to work as hard years 2, 3, 5 as you did year 1. If you're having to work harder over time, you've made a bunch of mistakes all in a row. So by building on the work that's already been done and spreading that water out, you reduce the stream power. It's less likely to blow out what you have. You get your floodplain going, you start growing your vegetation, and there's this virtuous spiral that starts to happen. So in addition to learning from the beavers, we should also support them. Out here in the West, lack of beavers is a source problem for stream health. So we should help the beavers persist by adding posts to their dams so that they don't blow out in the spring. And that leaves the beavers with more energy for expanding their habitat and breeding rather than making repairs to the dam under stress, right? They lose water, they start to panic because of the predation. They burn a bunch of calories rebuilding the dam. We can help them avoid that. And it's really fast. There is no more efficient, no faster, easier build than letting the beavers do all of the work and then just sticking a couple of posts in there. The 2 dams at the top, you know, that was a matter of minutes for the one on the right and maybe a half hour for the one on the left. And even a really big dam like the bottom, you can do that in just a few hours. That was a 175-foot beaver dam up in the Warner Mountains at 9,000 feet. And we were done in 2 hours. I mean, we burned way more time and carbon mobilizing to get there than doing the build. And all the materials that we're using here and everything the beavers have built are biodegradable. So these beaver dam complexes that we're reinforcing are still going to evolve over time. And that evolution over time ensures we have the kind of dynamic equilibrium that we want in our projects. We don't want stasis. We don't want hard, permanent things. We want them to change over time. Fire provides a lot of wood loading and sediment. In the first 2-3 years, you get this giant slug. Unused, that bunch of sediment can cause root sedimentation. But if you can catch it, you can rapidly erode your stream back towards connection to the floodplain and towards health. So, you know, this photo here is actually from a job that I got to work on in Idaho. And there were sections where the fire was so bad that it had burned the beaver dams back to the water line. So, you know, if this was your property, you'd be damn glad you had all this wet area. And we should be thinking about carving our landscape up with wetted areas as our fire breaks instead of dozer lines. Because you put in a dozer line, it becomes an eroding gully and makes the sedimentation worse. And doing all that with beavers is free. They'll build you these gorgeous fire breaks. So you remember how time is more than just the clock, right? It's flow years. Process-based restoration, it's much more than just building some structures. It's much more than just fixing a road crossing. You know, we're meaning to restore the sense of deep time. Think about millions of years of geology it took to build this landscape. The vanishing tiny little span of our work, and yet the immense potential effects of our work over centuries to come. So we're thinking about beaver dam complexes that we're never going to live to see. Those beaver dam complexes are going to flood meadows that our great grandchildren will never live to see. And we'll have elk herds moving across the landscape, ignoring state lines and county boundaries. Salmon will spawn on the gravels that our structures began to sort hundreds of years ago, long after everything that we built is collapsed and silted in and vegged over and disappeared. And we're also thinking about the people. They're going to drink that water. They're going to hunt those elk. They're going to sit in the shade of the trees that the things that we built grew hundreds of years ago. If we're not thinking about that kind of a time span, we're not talking about restoration. We're talking about construction. And we've got to quit talking about construction, because we've built everything that we'll ever need to build. We need to start restoring instead. And just about the time we start thinking we have an idea of what we ought to do, a little humility never hurt anybody, right? I mean, we're in the middle of running this accidental planet-wide experiment in total climate destabilization, and all of us are mandatory participants. So I've got a couple of folks waving at me from out of the van. So we're stuck participating in this experiment that we actually initiated. We have no idea what it's going to mean. So we should be a little less sure of ourselves and our actions. And we don't want to do anything that will limit the possibilities of those generations and restorationists who are coming with new science and new ideas. So that's why we're building with handwork. We're using biodegradable materials. We'll never harden a channel. We're not fighting the site. We just want to keep nudging it towards health. So this is a little video of one of the dams we built, and then I'll open it up for questions. It's just a little drone flight. So the beavers did all the work on this one, and we came back and just added a bunch of pins to it. And I think it came out just really, really beautifully. And we didn't have to do anything but stick some posts in it. Okay, oops. And there are a lot of folks that are interested in process-based restoration. You know, these are all large agencies that you see. It's not a fringe movement. It's not a bunch of hippies and toothpicks. It's a very well thought out science that's very well developed. And yeah, anybody that's interested in what's been presented today, you're more than welcome to contact me directly whenever. I realize it's a really quick overview of a whole bunch of stuff. I have no idea if that's actually what everyone was interested in, but there you go. I'm going to hand it back to Mike or whoever wants to.
That was great, Kevin. Thank you. I would encourage anyone who has a question, like Kirby did, just type it into the chat box, and we'll get to it. We might as well we'll start with Kirby's question, which basically comes down to can you talk about permitting and the challenges of getting permits when it's not one site, you may be choosing multiple different areas and whatnot.
Yeah, that's it's a good one. And luckily so far, I have not had to do permit one. I've never done any of the paperwork on any of this. Because the way it works out here so far is Uncle Sam funds a nonprofit or an NGO who hires me to do the work. The nonprofit takes 20% off the top as the middleman, but they do all of the permitting paperwork. So generally they find a site that they like. I submit a design for that site. That design gets the permitting and the funding. Then they bring the funding in and pay me out to do the job. The California regulatory environment is about as much of a pain in the ass as you could ever hope for. Like, you're not going to find anywhere worse than here. The permitting question is hyper local and hyper specific within a weirdly national framework, like NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act. You're going to have to get that anywhere you work. but all the California specific stuff, that's it's only valid here. So my suggestion would be do everything you can not to do the permitting yourself. Partner with a nonprofit that loves that. There are people that just dig paperwork, that love sitting under fluorescent lights. Find them and beg them to do it for you. And if you're one of those people that can do it, you amaze me. I don't know how anyone does it.
Yeah, that's I envy you not having to do any permits.
It's glorious.
You figured that one out well. Good job. Yeah, get hired as a subcontractor.
Yeah.
Let them do the permitting.
That's the way.
Because I would imagine it is a nightmare, especially in California.
Yeah, and it can drag on. There was one that took 12 years to permit. And in the end, we built 3 structures next to a golf course by a resort. It was a complete nightmare. I'm not going to say it was a waste, because that money paid me to do unpaid work on other projects that had a chance. But you'll run across those where somebody's got to burn a bunch of mitigation funding. If you get one of those, charge absolutely everything the market will bear, and then put that money into the projects you believe in that don't have good funding.
Pamela asked a question. It's actually one of my questions. You mentioned how you don't do wicker. And so could you talk a little bit about what you do to create the semi-impermeable BDAs?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we quit wicker, actually one of the primary reasons initially, was the danger of low back injuries. Specifically because when you're driving a 3-inch post that's 8 feet tall with a 90-pound hydraulic post driver, you are going to get hurt. And so the builds that I've seen that are these long architectural looking bits of wicker, all I see is people with sciatica. So instead, you just make a big messy pile of your material, lasagna it all together in maybe a 6-inch lift, and use whatever you've got in any size you've got. Like if you look at a beaver dam, they're very, very randomized, but they're also really, really well intermixed. So you do you think of it like lasagna, 6-inch layer of brush, add a whole bunch of cobble and dirt and mud and sod and whatever else you got, 6-inch layer of brush, and build yourself a really long, low pyramid, right? You never see a beaver dam that's vertical. They're always long and low. So you build your big brush pile, then you climb up on top of the brush pile, jam the posts through, and then when you're using your post driver, it's at chest height. And that way you're not going to get hurt. So I haven't built wicker in a year and a half. Actually, I did. I built one structure under protest because somebody wanted to see how it looked. But I've abandoned it completely. The other thing with wicker is...
Could you define wicker? We have a question defining what wicker is.
So wicker is just like a basket. You drive in a bunch of posts across the stream, and then you run your willows through those. And you'll see that when you put BDA into Google, you're going to see these wicker structures. They can work. I have not had great success. So they're slow, they're fiddly. People start asking you questions like, which way does the willow need to face? And when you're building 200 structures over 5.5 miles, you can't even take the time to have the discussion, or your whole project bogs down. I mean, if you waste 5 minutes per structure talking about which way to build the wicker, you're losing ground the while. So it's better to just throw more in there, make a big, rough, nasty pile, drive your posts into it, and build 10 more than to obsess and fiddle over the one. And hydrologically, your purchase is only as big as your posts plus the width of whatever you're weaving. So you've only got this little dinky slice of interaction with the water column. And you'll frequently see them end cut or scour under very early. If you're determined to build furniture in the stream bed, build a lot of it. Like stack them so close together that each one is backing up at least 50% water height to the next one. Like you'll see people build 5 and call it a pilot, and you come back in a year and all 5 have flopped over. So build more. Let's see, Malcolm, sir.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Kevin. That was a great presentation. I couldn't really use the chat box right now, so I just figured I would ask. One thing that you mentioned quite a bit was, and I've seen with this work, is the need for adaptive management based on how the river responds to these structures. And I guess, you know, considering that it can be a little unpredictable, one question I had was about the expectations that your clients have. Like, I know in traditional river restoration, oftentimes companies will say, we're going to restore X amount of wetland acres and so. So I guess I was wondering, do your clients understand that you can't really, you know, it really does depend on how each flow year responds on how much will get restored? Or do you sort of tell them a certain number and everything else is bonus type of thing?
Yeah, two things. One, languaging wise, it's important to distinguish between construction and restoration. If it's form-based, it's construction. They're constructing a wetland, they're constructing a channel. Well, it's impossible to restore to a pre-existing condition anything with a bulldozer prior to the existence of bulldozers. So when you're talking about restoration and your prior conditions, you have to also include the techniques used to restore. So you're talking about process-based restoration versus form-based construction. So form-based construction will always tell you, we'll build 10 ponds with X acre feet of water in them. And well, they won't usually tell you it'll persist even. They'll just say, we're going to build them. And then when they blow out in 5 years, they'll come back and say, oh, we need more money to fix it. So in terms of, do your clients understand it? That's on you. That's, as a practitioner, the expectation management piece, where at the very, very beginning, you start talking about the evolution of structures, not structural failure. You start talking about the trajectory of your site towards restoration over time, not the conditions year one. Now, you can talk about conditions year one. You can say things like, we're going to build 50 structures plus or minus 20 in this stretch of the stream with these restoration goals as the outcomes. If they have an expectation that there's going to be something solid that's going to persist and look like it was year one, then someone somewhere in there has misrepresented the work, and you'll want to manage that early and often and well. And what I'm finding in California is it's become popular enough, and enough people have at least read a little bit about it. They say, you understand it's a process over time, and they're like, yeah. And then next year you come back and one of your structures has gone from a channel spanner to a bank blaster. You'll get to have the same discussion again with the guy that said, yeah, who's now saying, no. So yeah, it's some people get it faster than others, and some folks will never get it, and you do not even let them hire you. Find your competition and feed them that job.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so it's also kind of weeding out who would get it.
Yeah, you don't want to work with me? Great. I absolutely don't want to work with you. And know that there's more than enough work for everybody. Our entire nation is wrecked. There will never be a shortage of work. There may initially be a shortage of knowledgeable people who will support the work, but the work itself is infinite.
Cool. One question I had is, you know, out here we don't do BDAs and PALs, but you know, we do similar things with diversion fences or starter dams. But when we put in, as you know, culvert fences, we're using metal posts, and even those are difficult to drive in sometimes. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you did a little bit about standing on top of the pile and driving it using a pneumatic pounder to push it in, but how often do you hit like bedrock, or how often do you not drive? I would imagine these posts, they have a pretty good diameter that they can be very difficult to get in and have any strength to them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I'm thinking about like building your starter dams, and a lot of the places that you're going to be driving posts to do your pond levelers are going to be in an urban environment or wild urban interface where a lot of our channels have cut to bedrock or have been hardened with aprons at the upside of a culvert or something like that. So if I'm doing a restoration project and I'll go out and I'll drive some test posts just to see what's there. If I'm hitting actual bedrock, not just hard pan, but bedrock within 6 inches, I actually will take a long step back and try to decide whether I want to do the project at all. Because what we're looking for with the process-based approach is we're looking for deep pre-existing depositional zones in otherwise degraded areas that will give us something to drive our posts into. If I go out and it's walking around on top of bedrock, I know that one, the stream is unlikely to degrade further because it's hit that bedrock bench. Two, I know I'm going to be short on sediment until I can locally recruit some. So we'll have to have this whole long conversation about how bank erosion is a good thing. And that will also tell me that there's kind of a lot of stream power in there for it to have cut all the way down. So like the project that had all those hand-placed rock dams, that was on me. I got there and I built a whole bunch of stuff and then came back to pin it and found out it was baby heads and microwaves underneath, and there was nothing, there's no way you can drive these posts in. So that almost everything that we built in the upper third of that project mobilized. Like 6 structures disappeared and then turned into a 7-foot tall giant pile of when it finally ran into a tree that would hold it. So that project was one that I poured a bunch of my own money back into because it didn't work like I wanted it to. And I just ate like 13 grand on that project because I didn't get the results I wanted. Now, if you're talking about form-based construction, a lot of folks will have an entire $1 million project disappear. They still get paid. Why are we not talking about performance contingent funding? Every other job, Mike, you put in a pond leveler and it doesn't work and someone pays you, you go fix it. Out here in the West, put in $1 million worth of rock, it's gone in the winter. Like you build it in the fall, it's gone in the winter, you still get paid, and then you get paid to repair it again. It's totally maddening. So make sure that you pick projects that are gonna work, or be prepared to bleed to make them work, because we can't afford to have a bunch of small, inappropriately placed process-based restoration projects fail and have that become the narrative. So you want to pick your projects really carefully on that basis.
Cool. Yeah, anyone else have questions? What I'll add to that is you touched on a little bit as far as site selection, looking at the substrate that you can drive things into. Are there any other tips you have about when these folks go out and look at a stream and thinking about restoring it, how to decide where to place these structures?
Yeah, the design element of placement of individual structures is, I think of it as stream aided design. I don't want to be going out and making the decisions. I want the stream to be telling me where to build my structures, because I trust the stream. Water cannot lie to you. You can lie to yourself. You can get bad data off a USGS stream gauge survey. You can miss things on the landscape, but the water will never lie. So if you find places where there's a nice depositional zone, right? Like you've got a sand or gravel bar and there's maybe a little veg, that tells you that you're in a depositional zone. And the whole purpose is to bring the riverbed up till it connects to the floodplain, because that's where all the life and magic is. So look for your depositional zones. Look for accumulations of pre-existing wood. If there's a spot where you've got a bunch of wood racked up, all you have to do is pack it and pin it. That's much faster than having to build from zero. And the stream, again, is telling you a structure will work here because I put it there. So listen to the stream more than you listen to your ideas about how you think the stream ought to look. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of desktop recon that you can do. Google Earth Time Series is great. Look at your site and then work your way back through all of the years. See if you can catch a flood event that changes a channel form. See if somebody built in there. Oh yeah, look, somebody punched a D9 down the middle of the channel in '93. Well, there's your source problem. it's not about structures. The structures are actually, I'm focusing on them here because it seems like kind of a hands-on crew. But your source problems are the things that you really want to address first, because they're driving the degradation. So almost invariably, it's going to be human. 3 years in, I've never seen a source problem that wasn't human. So look upstream and just go upstream as far as you need to until you find like a giant hanging culvert with a huge gully coming out of it, or a Walmart parking lot that grades out to a single pipe that's got a gully. So chase your incision up until you find the human infrastructure problem. Then fix that. Then think about adding structures to the stream. If you can't do it that way, then you build all of your structures in your site and make the case for correcting the source problem. So you can work it from both ends, but you need to know where the source problem is and have a plan for fixing it. Because if you're in a confined and sized urban reach where you're always going to be facing too much stream power forever, you'll never get anything to stick because you can't get ahead of the stream. And there's like the low-tech PBR manual from Wheaton and the Anna Branch guys at Utah State goes into unbelievable detail. It's like a 280-page doorstop of absolutely everything that you'll ever need. And it's still like, you'll still need to make a bunch of mistakes in the field, but pick good clients, pick good sites, and allow yourself the flexibility to have your structures change and get moved. That, like, you're not going to break the stream with a bunch of hand-placed wood. If you can break the stream and someone's mansion falls in, you've failed on the site selection at the beginning. So again, back to site and client selection and expectation management.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. I know it's 2:00 and I know you have people you're meeting.
Yes.
So
we're rolling up here for the tour.
yeah.
And if you guys are interested and want more and different stuff, I'm happy to come back and do another one. You can call me directly, read that low-tech PBR manual. Yeah, just know I'm on your team and feel resourced within whatever limitations I'm operating under.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, and we will be in touch and stay in touch. And
really, Brat software. Really quick, I just saw this from Jeff. Yeah, we ran the Brat for California. It's totally amazing. You want to make sure that you get all of your, there's a lot of tweaking you can do to the inputs, and you need much more nerdery to pull that off than I've got. Great software. Once you run it, then you go to ground truth it, and it can narrow your search down. Like if you're starting out with, I don't have any projects at all, you can run that. You can go find your projects that way, but always ground truth it, because no one has ever flown in a model airplane. It's the problem with all models. Okay, sweet. I got a jet. Thank you for showing up. This was great fun.
Hey, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. All right. Hey, Mike, if you're there, can you unmute everybody? It would have been.
I can only mute all. I don't think I can unmute all.
Oh, people can unmute themselves.
Yeah, that's
okay. Cool. All right. Well, I hope everyone found that useful. And as Kevin said, he's very generous as far as willing to be able to come back, and we can, have a more targeted talk if there's more specific things that you guys have questions about. And any questions, comments at this point?
I think, Mike, you'd probably do well to bring in one of these land management partners that he talks about working with that actually takes on the labor of laying out this guy's project plans and submitting that to regulators, because to me, that's one of the hardest parts. He's doing the fun work of go make a pile in a stream and drive posts through it and call it the work, but that's the easy step. the hard step is how do you get all that approved?
Yep.
Yeah, one thing I didn't ask him is about whether he was working mainly on private or public land. And I mean, I'm guessing that going off of that, the regulations or, whatever hoops you might have to jump change drastically depending on who your client is.
Yeah, and like where we are in Alberta, it doesn't matter. Even if he's on private land, the stream and the bed are owned by the Crown. So, the US is great because you guys have some freedoms, but I think even within your states and federally, there's probably, again, I don't work in that environment, but there's probably regulations in terms of who owns the water. So when he's just saying, I'm going to pound this in, if the water does this, I'm going to pound this in, if the water does this, I'm going to pound that in. Like, I don't know if these agencies he has doing all the paperwork are just misrepresenting the true extent of what he's doing, or they're sending frequent addendums and updates. But to me, that just sounds like an absolute regulatory nightmare that he's just blessed in a way he can't even imagine, to be like, I don't touch any of it. That's someone else's problem. So yeah, something to consider there.
Yeah, well, certainly I've done plenty of jobs, as I'm sure you and others have, where you're the subcontractor and you don't have to do the permitting. And so that's a very common thing. And it's certainly understandable why he wouldn't want to get into that. None of us do.
Oh yeah. Great if you
but it is important that it's done and it's done properly, as you're pointing out. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind for sure. All right, anything else? No, it's a little after 2. Well, all right, well, thanks everyone. I hope you found it informative, and we'll continue the dialogue.
Thanks a lot.
Right.
Thank you,
Take
Mike.
care, everyone.
Good
All
seeing
right.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
Stop your recording, Mike.
sure.